It all started in the summer of 2018 when I was about 14 or 15 years old. My family had gathered at my maternal grandparents' house for the holidays, and since it was the month of Ramadan, we often stayed up late, chatting and laughing together. The air was thick with the scents of spices and sweets, and our voices mingled with the sounds of the night, crickets chirping, the distant calls of the muezzin, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the warm breeze. Those nights were filled with warmth and love, a time for bonding and celebration, but little did we know that those moments would soon be overshadowed by fear and uncertainty. One night, just before suhoor, my cousins and I were joking around, our laughter echoing through the house, when suddenly, one of my cousins, Aisha, started feeling unwell. It happened so quickly that it felt surreal. One moment she was laughing with us, and the next, she collapsed. Her body went stiff, and her limbs twisted unnaturally. Panic set in, a wave of dread washing over us as we called our parents, who rushed to her side, desperately trying to wake her up. My aunt, her mother, was in tears, her cries piercing through the chaos, filled with a fear that no mother should ever have to experience. After what felt like an eternity, Aisha finally regained consciousness, but something felt off. There was a blankness in her eyes, a disconnect that made our hearts race with concern. The doctors couldn't diagnose anything wrong. Her tests came back normal, but the strange episodes continued. Every night, around the same time, she would lose consciousness, her body betraying her, and no doctor could explain why. It was as if we were living in a horror story, the kind you read about but never expect to experience. A week passed, and one night, something truly terrifying happened. Aisha was in her room when we heard eerie noises coming from inside. The sounds were not just unusual, they were inhuman. A strange, unrecognizable language echoed through the walls, sending chills down our spines. We rushed to her room, hearts pounding, and what we saw froze us in terror. Aisha was floating above her bed. Her body was suspended in the air as if invisible hands were holding her up. Her eyes were shut, but her lips were moving rapidly, whispering in a voice that wasn't her own. It was a scene that felt ripped from a nightmare, and we were powerless to wake ourselves from it. My uncle tried to pull her down, but she felt as heavy as iron, her body rigid and immovable. Our grandmother and aunt started reciting verses from the Quran, their voices trembling but resolute, hoping it would help. As soon as they did, Aisha let out a blood-curdling scream, a sound that seemed to resonate from the depths of hell, and fell back onto the bed, unconscious once more. In that moment, we knew this was no ordinary illness. This was something far more sinister. Desperate for answers, my uncle sought help from a spiritual healer, a man reputed to deal with the supernatural. The healer listened carefully to our story, his face grave as he performed some rituals before revealing a shocking truth. Aisha was under the influence of black magic. Someone from within our own family had cast a spell on her, a revelation that sent shockwaves through us. Who could harbor such malice? The thought alone was enough to make our skin crawl. The healer provided her with amulets and spiritual water, which seemed to help for a while, but then things took a turn for the worse. One evening, we were all sitting in the living room, the atmosphere tense yet hopeful, while Aisha was resting in her bedroom. Suddenly, one of my cousins noticed something outside her window. There, in the darkness of the lawn, was a shadowy figure, whispering in a low, raspy voice. We stepped closer to get a better look, but what we saw froze us in horror. Aisha was sitting outside in the dirt, her eyes burning red, her hands gripping her hair as she pulled at it violently. It was a sight that made our blood run cold. We screamed, the sound piercing the night air, drawing the attention of the elders. Hearing the commotion, they rushed outside. My uncle grabbed her, but she fought back like a wild animal, shrieking in a voice that wasn't hers. Her strength was inhuman, a testament to the dark forces that had taken hold of her. It took several men to hold her down and tie her to a chair. Her screams were deafening, almost like multiple voices speaking at once, a cacophony of anguish and rage. The healer was called again, urgency in his voice as he demanded to confront the entity that had taken hold of Aisha. The night was heavy with tension as he began the intense rituals, sweat glistening on his brow as he forced the spirit to speak. The voice revealed a chilling truth. A woman, a rejected lover of my uncle, had cursed Aisha out of revenge. She had used black magic, tying spells into Aisha's hair to cause her suffering. It was a revelation that left us reeling, the betrayal cutting deeper than any physical wound. The healer worked tirelessly for months to break the curse, each session a battle against the darkness that had invaded our lives. Strange occurrences continued in the house, objects moving on their own, whispers in the dark, shadows slipping past corners, always just out of sight. It was as if the very walls of our home were alive with the remnants of the evil that had taken root. But slowly, with prayers and protection, Aisha's condition began to improve. The light of hope flickered in our hearts, a beacon in the darkness. After nearly 4 months, Aisha fully recovered. The dark presence that had loomed over us finally left, and peace returned to our home. The laughter that had once filled the air began to seep back into our lives, tentative at first but growing stronger with each passing day. It was a slow realization that we had triumphed over the darkness, that love and faith had prevailed against the odds. To this day, we don't talk much about that time. The memories linger, haunting yet distant, like shadows that fade with the light of day. It was a terrifying experience, a reminder that evil exists, sometimes closer than we think, lurking in the corners of our lives, waiting for a moment of vulnerability to strike. But in the end, light always triumphs over darkness. Aisha's laughter returned, a sweet melody that filled our hearts with gratitude, reminding us that even in the face of despair, hope can reignite the flame of life. Our family emerged stronger, bound together by the trials we had faced, forever changed yet united in our resilience.